Hi there, my name is Ellen Thompson, and I'm a literacy consultant with Partnerships for Literacy and Learning. I put together a video called Vocabulary Matters, and it's a video for teachers, could be for moms and dads too. First, a little bit about myself. I am all sorts of things, and these pictures kind of show you that. I'm a mom, I'm a wife, a sister, I'm a spinner of fiber, mainly because I'm a goat farmer and I raise Angora goats for their fiber. I also own a gallery in Grand Isle. And I'm an islander. So that picture up here is a view from my road. So what we'll talk about in this video are three sets of information. The first one is about what the research says about vocabulary instruction. The second piece will be about some guiding principles for that instruction. What are some good practices to kind of keep in mind? And then the third part will be some instructional moves that you can try out in a digital or a school environment or a home environment. So all things are good. So first of all, what do we know? We actually know that children acquire up to 4,000 words per year. Becca McCowan did this research quite a long time ago, and it's pretty static. If people agree that about 4,000 words per year, but we also know that children are instructed in less than 400 words per year, and that's from Kuhn and Stahl's work in 1998. Now, there's a big difference between the number 4,000 and the number 400. So therefore, we do know that children are learning lots and lots of words somewhere, somehow. And how are they learning them? Through their reading. So kids who are good readers are getting exposed to more words. Kids who struggle with reading, not so much. Word knowledge is kind of interesting because words aren't all the same. They're complex. One often does not learn a word all at once. There are actually degrees of knowing. You've heard the word, you think you know what it means, and you're using the word all the time. So again, this idea that there's depth of knowledge that comes to word learning. Words are also multidimensional. They come in a spoken form, which is sometimes different than the written form or used differently. They're also come in association with other words. Some words hold a heavy dose of conceptual understanding, so they're words that have deep meaning to them. There's also a frequency with words, like how often we see them, how often we use them. And then there's a register with words. There's some words that you yell and some words that you whisper. And that's all part of that multidimensionality of the words. So, what does it mean to know a word? Keep going. We know that words have more than one meaning. They can be polysemic. And polysemic is one of my new words, so I like to say it a lot so I can learn it. But basically, we know that in one context they mean one thing. You move it to another context, they mean something else, but the word is exactly the same word. It hasn't changed its spelling or anything, it's the same. Words are not isolated units, they relate to other words. So for me, if I were to say to you a word like restaurant, without even trying too hard, you can probably imagine other words that go with the word restaurant. So we've got order, menu, waiter, waitress, food, breakfast, order, tip. There's all sorts of words that just sort of come flooding into your head when you say the word restaurant. And then the last part is knowing a word really depends on what kind of word it is. So some words you're going to catch on to right away and go with them. Other words are going to take a lot longer to understand. So what elements are needed for good vocabulary instruction? This is probably one of my favorite slides because basically what it says is that all instruction produces more word learning than no instruction. Well, that's kind of a duh. Of course, if we teach it, kids will learn it. So again, that's good. And then the next piece, though, is that the research has not pointed out that one method has been proven superior to other methods. So we can't do it wrong. We need to do it, and we can do it in different ways. And we can't be wrong. We need to get it going. There is one piece of the research that does talk about that using a variety of methods does have advantages. And you can just think about that from yourself. If all your teacher ever does is ask you to write your word in a sentence, that gets pretty humdrum after a while, and you stop actually paying attention to the word. You just kind of crap that sentence and off you go. The thing we do know from the research is that children need repeated exposures to the words. And you're going to hear that from me a few times in this slideshow. Their research points to the fact that they need 10 to 40 encounters with a word. And I would contend those encounters should not all be flat. In other words, they should be in the kids' mouths, they should be in their writing, they should be in their reading, they should be all over the place. So they really get an understanding of a deep understanding of the word. So why bother? We've got a lot of other things to teach. Let's just toss that vocabulary thing out the window and forget about it. But one of the things we do know is that there is a direct link from vocabulary knowledge to comprehension of reading. When I talk about vocabulary with teachers, I always talk about vocabulary as being a marker of knowledge. So, in other words, when we know something, we name it. And that's the vocabulary of that knowing. Well, when we think about comprehension of reading, we know that kids need to access their background knowledge, and that background knowledge is marked by vocabulary knowledge. So again, kids with really strong background knowledge often have a really strong vocabulary knowledge as well. And the two together help with the comprehension of reading. So much easier to read a book about a topic that you know and understand really well already. So the amount of words acquired from context is dependent on the amount of text read and the ability of the child to read it. Okay, that's another no-brainer. If I can read a lot, I'm going to be exposed to a lot of text. If I can read at my grade level or above, I'm going to be exposed to many more words that are of significant value to me as a person and as a reader. So a good reader will learn up to 5 times more words than a struggling reader. If I'm a struggling reader in 5th grade reading at the 3rd grade level, I'm only being exposed to words that are from the 3rd grade level. So there's that gap. Culturally, vocabulary knowledge and usage is an indicator of intellectual ability. And that kind of sounds pretty lofty, but think about it. You go into a group of people you've never met before, you can size them up as soon as they open their mouths. And you may be right or wrong, but you, when they begin to talk, you begin to understand what they bring to the table. What is their knowledge capacity? What is their intellectual ability? And again, for kids, they need to know how to use their words correctly to move forward in school, in life, and a lot of other places. This adage is an old one, but the rich get richer, the poor get poorer. If you think about it, kids who come to school with less experience, less exposure to and understanding of vocabulary, less understandings of their world, um, there's an ever widening loss of understanding. So again, it's that background knowledge snafu. If you don't have it, it's going to affect a lot of what you do. And the unfortunate part is the gap just keeps increasing. These children have less language to start with when they begin, and as a result, they show less and less understanding of language through their school years. This is just plain not okay. So we realize it's a problem and we need to address it, especially for those kids who are struggling with language and reading. So here are some basic principles for instruction. The first one is select words for children that they'll encounter while they're reading. So read alouds are a great place to capture words because you're going to be reading it aloud, you're going to be talking about the story, whatever, but these are words that they're going to hear and see while they're reading. Another one is to teach words in relation to other words. That word restaurant doesn't live alone. It lives with all those other words. So this idea of brainstorming all the possible connections when you have a great, fabulous word like restaurant. And then teach students to relate words to their background knowledge. This is what I said before. We have experiences in our background knowledge. We need to help our kids name that so that they have the words that describe what it is they know. And that doesn't always happen. Sometimes kids are going through life and they're not getting that exposure to those words that really do sum up what they know. Another one is to teach words in pre-reading activities to activate knowledge. So putting some words out there first, and letting the kids think about what that will have to do with the story. Use those same words in a post-reading discussion, maybe a written response, and maybe you have the kids do a retelling and they're using those words as well. So if you think about the 10 to 40 exposures, if you're teaching those words at pre-reading, there's one. If you use them in a if you talk about them during the reading, that's two. A post-reading discussion is three. A written response would be four, and a retelling would be five. So right away, you've got five exposures to words that you've selected for the kids. Teach words systematically and in depth. So this is not the time for clarifying definitions. So you're reading along, come to a word they don't know, you say, hey, did you know this means XXX? And the kids say, oh, yeah, I get it. That doesn't count, okay? That is a cursory example at best. We want to do it deeply and systematically. And the last one is it's your goal in all of this. If you do those preceding principles and keep those in your toolkit, what usually happens is you'll awaken an interest and an enthusiasm for words. And the research actually calls this word consciousness. In other words, the kids will begin to think about words as kind of cool and different, and they'll start asking about words and wanting to talk about them more and more. It's actually kind of fun to watch happen in a classroom. So again, I'm going to go back to those levels of understanding. I think it's really important. You need 10 to 40 encounters with a word to begin to make it your own. And there's levels of that understanding. That first one is no idea. I heard the word, they said it. It probably means something. I have no idea. The second level is that general sense of meaning. Okay, they were talking about this. I kind of think it might be, but you're just not sure. The third one is a narrow, kind of context bound understanding. It's the word that is in the story, and you only think about it in that story. You can't take it out of the book and put it anywhere else. Um, there's also you have a bigger knowledge of it. You know it. You really do understand it, but you cannot readily access it in appropriate situations. Now, I can give you a great example of these levels. I had a wonderful professor who I really admired and wanted to be just like when I was doing my doctoral program. And she would use words that clearly I had no idea what they meant. And they were literacy words, and I'm a literacy geek, so that's kind of unusual. But basically, she would use words, and after a while, I started to write down the words she was using because I wanted to be just like her, remember? So I wanted to understand. Well, eventually, at least one of those words that I can remember vividly, I got to the point where I did know what it meant. I had moved it from no idea to I had a general sense of it, but it was only in that classroom. That was the only place I had ever heard it. It's the only way I could even think about how somebody would use it. That knowledge grew, but it probably took me 2 years before I ever used that word in a conversation with other people. And I think it was even longer than that, than when I actually used it in writing. It was at that point that I had this rich, sort of decontextualized knowledge of a word's meaning. So I could use it when I needed to. But I went from no idea to a rich, decontextualized knowledge of a word's meaning in 2 to 3 years. So think about that. I do a lot of reading. I do a lot of other things, but this word really stymied me. And I'll tell you what the word was. The word was bifurcate. And I can now use that word like a pro. Bifurcate. So the big question that teachers always ask is, if we've got to do this and we've got kids who don't have enough words in their vocabulary lexicon, what words do we teach? What words do we use? We can't teach 4,000 words a year. So what words are there? There must be a magic list. And I hate to tell you, there isn't a magic list, because your classroom, your kids, the books you're reading, the subjects you're learning about, the town you live in, they're all different. So again, you need to think about, you need to choose words because you want to do this systematically. I would say choose words that help grow more words. Kind of like that restaurant example. Inside of there are a whole lot more words we can talk about, but restaurant is the word we're going to center on. You want words that are deep with conceptual understanding. They aren't the first glance words. They're the bifurcate of your world. Okay. And then you want to choose words that matter socially, critically, critical thinking words, words that really stand up to the test of time. Beck and McCowan remind us that there's three types of vocabulary. So when we are thinking about putting it in our classroom, we want to make sure we understand what types we're working with. They put them into tiers. And so the tier one is that basic language. It's kind of the everyday words: house, cat, dog, table, desk, computer. They're not all nouns, but they do name things. They're pretty basic. People understand them. They're the words that primary teachers are really wrapped tightly around, because those are the first words that kids begin to read, becomes part of their sight vocabulary and whatnot. But ELL students, if you think about it, no matter their age, will need that basic language as well. So there is times when we center on that. Tier three language is the language of content. So when I walk into a mathematics classroom, I know I'm in a mathematics classroom because the language is different. They're talking about angles and properties and sides and all sorts of things that I wouldn't hear in another classroom. So that's content vocabulary. I think teachers have done a really, really good job with tier one and tier three vocabulary. I think they're doing a way better job right now with tier two, but that's the set of words that I'm most interested in right now, because those are the words that enhance meaning. They're the words that make the description leap off the page. They're the words that when you say them, you get a real sense of how that character is feeling. They are also the words that make you sound smart. They're sophisticated language, okay? And in most cases, kids who are coming from busy households are not hearing those words on a daily basis. They're hearing much more directive language. It's time for your homework, need to take a bath, dinner's on the table, that kind of thing. But they're not hearing those sophisticated tier two words. So I feel like teachers really need to address that gap. So how can we support new vocabulary learning at home and at school? Next up in the slideshow, I'm going to show you 5 instructional moves that can be performed with a teacher or other learning partners, your mom, your dad, maybe a paraeducator in the classroom, um, all easy enough to do for folks. So the first question that people come to is, how do you know what words your students already know? Well, this is another no-brainer. Just ask them. I don't know why we're so afraid to put in front of kids a list of words and say, do you know these? Teachers will say, well, they won't tell the truth. Why wouldn't they? I mean, really, it's not going to hurt them if they don't know the words. So again, we want to think about that a little bit. So we want to ask them. So one of the things I do in order to find out what words my kids know is I use a knowledge rating chart. And I can use this with very, very young kids, and I can use it with older kids too. And basically, what I do is I take story words or content vocabulary, whatever it is I'm working with right at the moment, and I give the kids those words. Younger kids, I might actually put them on cards. Older kids, I'd probably have them written down. And I ask them to tell me, do you know the word? Do you sort of know the word? Can you use the word? And the little kids will actually sort it. Let me show you. This one is 4 words from a unit on matter, a science unit, given to younger kids. Well, you can see that they sorted them. This child knows liquid and gas. They sort of know solid, and they do not know matter. Well, when I look at that, I can start my conversation with that child in a very different place than somebody else. If all of my kids don't know what matter is, I need to think about that. Um, Usually I do this before the unit of study, and then I bring the words back out at the end of the unit of study and ask the kids to resort them. And that way I can actually have an assessment. Do the words I do not know, do they move into the words I know column? Again, it's that trust factor. We're asking kids what they know. Here's an older one, again, a science unit. And you can see that they have no idea about some words. They've seen and heard the word. It's now starting to grow up a little bit. The third column now says, I can tell you what it means. And the fourth column is I can actually use it in talking and writing. And with older kids, I might actually ask them to take those 3 words they put in that column and on the back of the paper actually write to me using that word so they can show me that they understand what it means. Same deal with older kids. I give them this sheet back at the end of the unit, and I ask them to sort the words as to how they feel about them now, and I can use that as an assessment piece for my unit of study. Oh, another one that I really like is vocabulary nominations. If we're having kids do a lot of reading, and which we should, then we can have them find some really great words. So kids get to nominate a new word from their reading for the class to get to know more deeply. And what I do is I collect those words, and then I might choose if I have 20 kids and I get 20 words in, I may randomly pull 3 words out to challenge the kids um, to get to know that word and to actually use that word and to keep track of how they were using that word in their reading journals. Here's a vocabulary nomination form, just a really easy one. They draw a picture of the word, they can tell you what they think it means and why it's important for the class to know. Again, I usually sort out of these. You could have a kiddo in the classroom could be the person who chooses the word. It doesn't have to be the teacher. But again, the challenge then is to give the whole class the challenge of using the word. This is another one. Again, if you have that nominated word and your kids are working with it, have them do a semantic web. So this it goes back to that restaurant example where you're taking the word, put it in the middle, and then begin to flesh out everything I know about that word. Now, you could do that with the nominated word. It could also be in your reading journal that you're keeping over time, jotting down things about the books we're reading. You may notice that the bottom semantic web here is not as detailed as the top. Well, that could happen in a reading journal too. When I first do my semantic web, I know certain things, but as we do more with our unit of study, I know more, so I'll add to it. So you can actually see it grow. You could have the kids use different colored pencils or different font colors on the computer to show what are the originals and what are the newer things as well. So there's a third way to get kids working with words. The fourth one is what I keep talking about is reading journals. So a reading journal is a great place. It could be a Google Doc. It doesn't have to be a paper journal, but it's a place for kids to document their understanding of their vocabulary in the books and texts that they're reading. So again, as I said before, the 3 things that we just looked at, the knowledge rating chart could be in there, the nominated words could be in there, and then that semantic webbing of the class words could be kept in a reading journal. And then you've got this great place where kids can actually track their knowledge growing. So again, if they understand that vocabulary is a marker of my knowledge, they will have a fun time kind of looking back, noticing which words they're learning throughout the year. And then the fifth one, I have to say, because it's my favorite thing in the whole wide world, and that's just the importance of read alouds. You will have kids who are struggling with reading. You will have kids who are not reading at grade level. And you will have kids who read beyond grade level. That's just a given. So what I want to do is make sure that I'm reading high quality text to my kids every single day. If I'm it doesn't really matter what grade I'd be reading. I often read longer books to very young kids. I think there's a value in that because they begin to develop a relationship with characters across the chapters of the book versus just in one setting with a picture book. But don't be fooled. Picture books are written at very high levels and they should be used with older kids too. So we want to swap things up a little bit, mix it up. But what I would do is choose 4 or 5 words from the beginning of the new chapter or the book, the picture book that I'm using, and I would actually let the kids see those words first. And I might say to them, hey, these words are in the chapter we're going to read. What do you think this chapter will be about? And then I want them to think by themselves, and I want them to think with a partner, and then I want us to maybe as a class make a prediction about what we think this next chapter will be about. And we start reading. So now we've done our before, and then during the reading, these words are in the reading, so they're going to come up. And if you're lucky and you picked some really solid words, the kids will say, whoa, that's our word. And then we'll talk about how it's being used in the chapter at that particular point. And then at the end of this read aloud, you may have other new words that are become, fascinating to the kids. And you say, well, let's put that word on our list of new words to learn about. And so you begin to, um, you're filling that prophecy of new words. You're getting it going. There's a cycle to it. Let's just take a look at a read aloud example. One of my favorite books to read to adults actually is Arnie the Donut by Lori Keller. And when I do this with adults, I give them these 5 words to begin with. I've done it with kids too, but adults, it's kind of funny. So here are the 5 words, and I want you to think about it. The book is called Arnie the Donut, and here are the words: conversation, wasteful, inseparable, grateful, discovered. What do you think the book is going to be about? Arnie the Donut, conversation, wasteful, inseparable, grateful, discovered. Hmm, how'd you do? There's Arnie. It's a great book. You have to read it because he does have a friend with whom he is inseparable. Oh, and we're at the end of the show because this is a picture of me 150 years ago, a much younger me. I was Miss T in that classroom for 21 years, and I'm reading aloud to an audience of students and family members. It's actually part of our author's tea. So the kids up front by me have already read some of the stories that they've written, and I am now reading the book that I published right alongside of them to that audience. Read aloud is really pretty compelling. And then a little bit more, I guess, about me, that Miss T. I am a longtime educator, over 43 years. I taught in that classroom that you saw on the slide before for 21 years. Most of those years, I taught a multi-age classroom by choice. My last 8 years or so, I taught a 1, 2, 3 multi-age with kids grades 6 through 9. So I had my kids for 3 years, and that was a gift for me. From the classroom, I started doing national consulting. Sometime in the next year or so, I was invited in as a UVM literacy faculty member for the elementary ed program, which was just a blast. I loved it. Plus, I had gone there as an undergrad and also my master's, so it was really fun for me to be on the inside looking out. Did get my doctorate at that point, and from there, I headed back into public school and became the curriculum and technology director of Essex Town for about 13 years. And now I'm back into literacy consulting. The pendulum does swing, and I'm working with partnerships for literacy and learning. And I'm loving every minute of that. So while I'm not in public ed necessarily, I'm working with public ed teachers and kids, and it's a blast. So I really do love it. So if you have any questions, my email is ethompson@pllbt.org. I'd be happy to answer them if I can. There may be more videos. I don't know. You can let me know what you think and if we should. But anyway, this was fun to share with you. So thank you.